Today's speaker in the La Trobe Innovation Series is Mr. David Williamson, CEO of the Melbourne Innovation Centre. David's presentation is entitled Melbourne Innovation Centre, a case study in innovation. The Melbourne Innovation Centre has been operating for about 19 years and has been self-funded since about 1998. His organisation's role is to teach, train, mentor and support entrepreneurs and startups in Melbourne's northern region. The organisation has incubated over 400 startups and scale-up businesses through the period, creating in excess of 1,500 jobs in Melbourne's north, and contributes about 66 million annually to the national economy. David outlines the current state of Northern Melbourne's innovation system in some detail in his presentation, and the key industry, tertiary, state and local government and intermediary players that help shape it. He discusses how the Melbourne Innovation Centre's methodology to assist startups and entrepreneurs has changed rapidly over the last 3 years. That is, away from writing long business plans to lean methodologies, startup science that utilise things like the business canvas, lean startup, design thinking and prototyping strategies for rapid deployment. He noted that during this time, the typical age profile of the clients for the Melbourne Innovation Centre went from people in their 30s to 40s down to 20s and 30s. David also discusses changes to national legislation in venture capital and crowdfunding, which is similar to what's occurred in the United States and New Zealand, and he believes that that will be a great opportunity to nurture investment in Australia.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, to be invited to speak this morning, and there's been a really, excellent array of presentations already, so to follow on from that, hopefully the flavour continues. I was really interested last night, particularly with Craig's presentation, and had my mind blown a little bit, and even though I'm working in innovation day to day in the startup sector, which is incredibly fast paced, some of the statistics that were reeled off last night are quite confronting. And then it was just this morning when I was getting ready to leave to come here that my 3-year-old walked out from her bedroom and said to me, "Dad, just so you know, my baby's at my boyfriend's house, Rory," which is good because I'm really busy today, because she's going to be a ballerina, a singer, a scientist, an inventor, an engineer, an architect, and I just but it's really interesting how children of that age and the primary school age students and secondary school students that we're looking at working with through the new tech school project, which I'll talk about briefly, they're expecting this rate of change. They're right within it. Their generation, this is normal to them. And so even, a kind of sub-generation ahead of that, I find it very confronting. So I think it's a really interesting time and a really good time for us to be having this conversation and coming together. So Alex has given a very good introduction in terms of my background, but I got into the incubator space 10 years ago. So I started as a business consultant at what was then called the Darabin Enterprise Centre, and I was dropped out in the middle of Central Australia in Yuendamu, a remote Indigenous community, and at that time we were working on some social enterprise projects. So I was out there looking at how local community could better deliver some of the services that were being delivered by fly-in, fly-out personnel at that time, things like solar panels, which essentially we looked into. It was a glorified window washing job most of the year, maintaining those resources and assets. And we were thinking about those types of things and having that social enterprise conversation back then. And so, again, the types of discussions we're having here over these couple of days are really pertinent, and I think that we've advanced a long way since then, and we're moving at a much faster pace. So just a quick overview of what I'll cover. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, an overview of Melbourne's North and the existing ecosystem. We do a lot of work in the management consultancy arm of our business, looking at new incubators, new innovation centres throughout the region and throughout Australia more broadly. and there is a lot happening in this space. So not only have you got most universities developing accelerator and incubator programs, as La Trobe have been working very hard and diligently at, but also you've got local government playing a significant role, and more so extending their relationship through to state and federal government in pushing the NISA agenda, which I'll talk to as well. I'll talk briefly about the background of MIC, so our 20-year history. So we're fast approaching our 20th anniversary. And I'll also talk and touch on the changes in innovation and incubation over that time. So even from when I started, we've skipped a few generations ahead in terms of how we apply methodologies, as have already been broadly covered, and the way that we teach, train and support and nurture our startup businesses and entrepreneurs that we work with. And then I'll touch lastly on corporate innovation, which I see as a significant opportunity on both a regional level, but also particularly for the tertiary sector in terms of creating that collaboration with industry and with significant corporate organisations. So just to touch on, I've got a few dot points here, but this is a bit of a snapshot of Melbourne's north in the incubator space and the innovation space as well. So we've got a couple of independent incubators. We've got Melbourne Innovation Centre, obviously, BBI's Brunswick Business Incubator, and we've got Anthony O'Brien, the manager of Brunswick's, here today as well, which is great to see. Both really long-running incubator programs were started and spawned out of local government initiatives and have ultimately been very sustainable and very successful in their model and design. And then we've got, as I've earlier mentioned, a range of tertiary-based programs that are being launched or have been launched recently. La Trobe's obviously got the Unis Social Business Centre, the Regional Accelerator Program, which was recently launched, and also we heard just last night that the incubator will be launched in this amazing new business school space. In addition to that, you've got RMIT with a significant presence in the north. They have their Activator program. And then Melbourne Polytechnic are running a range of student entrepreneurship programs as well. And we've got the tech schools coming online in June next year. So there is a lot happening in that tertiary space. And then you've got private and local government co-working spaces which are emerging probably closer to the inner metro parts of the north. And they're, obviously a mixture of privately owned for-profit operations. And then you've got some really amazing local government programs and initiatives that are running as well. Economic development play a significant role in this space as well. There's some really amazing programs, particularly through the City of Darebin, have their Active Spaces program, which has been nationally recognised as well. And then you've got industry linkages, organisations such as Northlink, who are playing a key role within the region in bringing incubators, tertiary organisations, industry together to collaborate and create value. I'll talk more about those tech schools in a moment. So we've noticed from a Melbourne Innovation Centre perspective, and I think that this could be applied on a national context, that the journey and I guess the customer experience for an entrepreneur has changed significantly, even in the last couple of years. And this is probably in line with the agenda set by the federal government, the National Innovation and Science Agenda, where we're very much talking entrepreneurship. We're talking about commercialisation of IP. We're talking about how we can capture value out of the the really strong R&D sector and capacity that we have in this country. So we're seeing that there's this gradual shift happening in terms of the profile of the founders who approach us, the makeup of their teams. Typically, they're becoming much younger. So we're having students come straight out of university who either don't want to go into full-time employment or are particularly passionate about an idea or concept that they have, that they don't want to wait. They just want to get straight into it and get started. That is an amazing space to be working in at the moment. The energy and enthusiasm, it's exhausting at the same time to work with this cohort. But we're seeing that real shift. Traditionally within our incubator model, we were having people approach us with a business concept. They were in their late 30s to early 40s. They'd had a couple of iterations of their career. They were self-funded. They had some capital sitting there ready to go, ready to launch an enterprise. we still interact with that part of the market. However, we're seeing this gradual shift towards youth entrepreneurship, growing scalable companies, fast-paced movement, and that's where it's going. Lean methodology, as everyone's mentioned, within our programs, we're talking lean business model canvas. We're looking at Steve Blank's theory. We're looking at Alexander Osterwalder. So all of the popular theory, it's very much in play within our sector now. And that is quite a transition, even over probably a 3 to 5 year period, where prior to that we were writing 70 to 80 page business plans. These days it's about deploying these ideas quickly, testing them, validating them prior to making significant investment. And so that's a significant shift in what we're doing. Changes in sources of capital. We've just recently had the equity crowdfunding legislation reach royal assent in Australia. That is going to greatly democratise the investment in startups, and I think we'll see a huge spike in new founders and new entrepreneurs emerging, based on the fact that there will be funding available. The NISA agenda talked largely about the rate of VC capital as an indicator of innovative activity and capacity within a region. Typically in Australia, VC funds have been held pretty close to the chest. There's various arguments for and against that, basically suggesting that the quality of deal flow may not have been there. But what's really interesting now is that there will be a rapid increase in deal flow. I think the movement of universities over the last couple of years is absolutely fascinating, and it will be a significant contributor to that I guess increase in deal flow and opportunity. The other interesting one that we're seeing is the whole side hack movement. Who's aware of that term and that concept? Anyone? No one brave enough to put their hand up? Yes? Yeah, so the whole concept of a side hack is you're either, you may be running another organisation or you're currently employed. And while you're employed, you're coming up with your new idea or concept, and in many cases launching that venture. And what we're seeing now is that organisations and employers are actually really encouraging this process. We do it within our team. We're encouraging our staff to launch businesses and launch companies, because who are we to say that we know how to do it if we haven't done it? And so that's a really interesting shift at the same time. And what we're seeing as well is through that process, staff within these larger organisations are building innovative capacity. They're understanding the methodology, and they're being able to apply those learnings within the context of their existing position within an organisation. So in many cases, it's being actively encouraged. So just give a quick snapshot of our history and what we came from and what we are today. So in October 1997, we were established, and this was off the back of a number of local economic development job training programs that have been running for around 18 months to 2 years. And the City of Darebin saw fit to allocate a significant asset, a 3.6 hectare site, with office space, workshop space, warehouse space, and we've utilised that for the best part of that 20 years to house entrepreneurs and support scale up and start up businesses. So they were very much visionary at the time. We were one of the first business incubators in Australia, and now one of the longest running. And it was, it was seen as quite a forward-thinking process to be doing that. What was happening at the time in 1997 as well was that there was investment going into incubators. There was the incubator program through Oz Industry, and organisations were able to access up to $500,000 to establish new incubator programs. So we were a recipient of that funding. Unfortunately, the flow-on effect of that was that a number of these incubators failed. And there are a few different reasons why that was. The incubator model back in those days was largely based around real estate and fees generated from space, offices, workshop space, etc. And a number of those incubators weren't large enough, basically. They didn't have the floor space to generate significant revenue to be able to employ a team, run programs that were delivering value to the client. So ultimately, incubation became a bit of a dirty word, and I was a bit upset to hear earlier this week that we're only around 18 months into this innovation ideas boom, and we're already talking about innovation being a dirty word. So I think we need to just check ourselves for a minute and focus on the task at hand. In 2007, we established the Indigenous Business Incubator, which has been running now obviously for a decade. And through that process, we support the establishment and development of either individually led or community-led Indigenous enterprise. And through that process, we've assisted in the planning and launch of 100, over 100 now, Indigenous enterprises throughout that time. In 2008, we were awarded Incubator of the Year, International Incubator of the Year in the US. So seemingly the mecca of business incubation, and we were that was a year after I arrived, and I take no credit for that. However, a really significant achievement for the organisation, and only 2 other Australian incubators have received that award. In 2010, again in partnership with the City of Darebin, we opened a digital arts specific business incubator in Northcote, which is in the old Northcote Police Station. It's a fantastic building. And that space is used particularly to forward the case and grow those digital arts related businesses. So we've got businesses like VR, AR, video game design, 3D scanning and printing, all housed within this one little hotbed environment, and it works very nicely. In 2013, we opened a co-working space in collaboration with Australia Post in Banyule in the Heidelberg West Mall. And that's been running now for 4 years with, again, we're in a different subsection of the north, different clientele again. We've had a number of Somali-founded enterprises go through that space with some great success, and I'll talk to one of the case studies in a moment. And then in 2016, we actually lifted our model again and dropped it in Geelong with the Small Business Hive in collaboration with Australia Post again. And then just this year, we've opened a very nice, shiny new government-funded fit-out space in Greensborough, which I'd love to welcome you all to come and attend and have a look at if you have any time. So I'll skip over this quickly, but this is basically our structure. We're a not-for-profit company, 11 directors, including 2 councillors from the City of Darebin and the Manager of Economic Development. Eddie's in the back row, he's here today. And then our management and staffing, we have 10 staff and contractors who largely deliver the programs and mentoring. We have a mentoring panel, and the last point there, we've been self-funded and sustainable since 1998. So there's been no further funding in addition to that initial $500,000 grant. So our strategy, our broad strategy and vision is to be recognised as a local and global leader in innovation, acceleration and incubation for future industries. And our mission is to create and support the growth of startup and scale-ups, forging and strengthening collaborative partnerships to achieve significant local, national and international economic impact. It's a little bit of a mouthful. But largely what we're really on about is developing and fostering an innovative culture. And I was having the conversation last night with a couple of people around the differences between soft and hard infrastructure with programs such as this. And really, what we need to be careful of moving away from is that hard infrastructure, the buildings, the spaces that people come into to collaborate and work together is incredibly important. That's your culture, that's your way of supporting each other, of coming together and collaborating. And we're very mindful of that moving forward. So the incubation program, here's a number of dot points, I guess, of what we deliver. I've mentioned our lean methodology. The team assists with market analysis. We assist with prototyping and MVP, particularly in the digital space. So, for example, testing a new market idea, you might need to build a landing page. And that's a really cheap way of testing and validating an idea. Or we might have the discussion with a client. These are the top 10 people from that industry on LinkedIn. Throw out a message to them. Throw your idea to them. Get their feedback at this early stage. So just some really, I guess, practical ways of working through this validation process. Pitching and capital. The capital space is particularly interesting, as I mentioned before, with equity crowdfunding coming online. But increasingly important, as I mentioned, is that culture, and the serendipity is a word that I really like to mention. We've got numerous stories of our businesses finding and almost falling over each other in many ways in completely different industries and creating a lot of value. Just a couple of years ago now, it was actually, we've got a large artisan community at Alphington, and one of our clients there is a French polisher, and he introduced our gourmet olive oil exporter to an investor in Japan, and they forged a relationship which led to them now selling to Costco in Japan and exporting on a large scale. So it doesn't necessarily need to be similar industries clustering together to create this value. It's more about a mindset and a generous mindset and culture. So just some of the statistics that we're pretty proud of. 86% of our MIC businesses are still operating after 5 years. This is fairly typical across the incubator industry in Australia, around 80%. So we kind of flip that small business, startup business success failure rate, which is a really useful statistic to have on hand. And that's really around that nurturing, supporting, and in some cases, look, we do admit we back some winners. We like to back winners. The average MIC graduate has revenues of over $1.5 million. So obviously we've got some businesses right up at the really high end and some at the lower end, some outliers to that. But the average business comes in and quadruples their revenue with us, which over about 3 to 5 years. We've incubated over 400 businesses. That's now fast approaching 500 businesses. Our 100 Indigenous businesses we've worked with over that period, and our graduates have created over 1,600 new jobs. That's while they're in the incubator. That's not including the jobs created beyond the incubation process. We contribute $66 million to the Victorian economy every year. That study was conducted earlier last year, so fairly recent information. And 43% of our MIC clients are from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, and 68% of our staff are, and I guess that's representative of the region that we work within, but something that works really nicely for us. So our current business, as I mentioned, we've got multiple sites with Alphington, Heidelberg West, Northcote and Greensborough, and also Geelong. We manage over 21,000 square metres of incubator floor space. The common measure used for a sustainable model is around 3,000 to 5,000 square metres. So obviously we've built significantly above that. Again, as I've mentioned, so the delivery and training and mentoring to our on-site client businesses, but we also deliver programs to the broader startup and scale-up community as well. And we've worked with over 1,000 businesses over the past, that's actually over just the past 5 years through various programs. We do a lot of, as I mentioned, consulting and strategic planning projects for local government and for private organisations in establishing similar initiatives as well. So our current and future business, where, as I mentioned, the last 2 years has seen a significant change, and we're moving forward with that and embracing that. Tech kind of found us more than us reaching tech, and I think that's a key indicator of the way that the Australian economy is moving towards more of a knowledge-based economy. But we're seeing clients across all of those specific industry foci there, but a lot around tech, a lot of renewable energy. We're doing a lot of work in food and beverage now around sustainability, around reducing and closing that supply chain and removing any inefficiencies in that space. And the last point there is something that a big piece for us is that we're working to establish our own accelerator investment fund. So we have the accelerator coming online next year, but we're looking to establish our own seed capital investment fund. So I've covered off on a lot of the industry, but really, really broad array of clients across a range of industries. That art piece there on the top of the sculpture is actually on Peninsula Link. One of our clients built that on site at Alphington. It's enormous. It took 3 trucks down the freeway to deliver it. And then we've got Cube there, who work with sustainable furniture. But I'll talk through a couple of our client stories. We've got some new faces on site recently, as I was talking about food sustainability. Farmwall have just come online. They're developing aquaponic, a mixture of aquaponic and hydroponic technology that will be hosted within restaurants and cafes. So the image at the top of the Farmwall, it's got the fish tank at the bottom, and then the microgreens growing above. So they're building that prototype at the moment as we speak in one of our workshop spaces at Alphington. And they've also just, in the middle of a fundraising round through crowdfunding, they've nearly raised $30,000. And they've got another investor who's just come on board to throw in another couple of $100,000. So really good story, moving at a really fast pace, these guys. And also a really good story in terms of the collaborative nature of the ecosystem in the north, where they accessed a co-working space in Thornbury. They access various education programs, startup education programs, and then now they've come into the incubator to actually make it happen. So it's just showing how the ecosystem can work together. SI Cooling are developing a new ICT infrastructure cooling technology. They've built that into a shipping container at our Greensborough site, and it's sitting there for clients and customers to come and have a look at. And then the guys from Lifecycle, Ryan and Julian, they're growing mushrooms in shipping containers using secondhand coffee grind from Virgin Airlines. And so, yeah, really trying to close that loop and reduce wastage. The guys are amazing, actually, and they've just come on site recently as well. So anything and everything you can think of. We've had the flying car that was mentioned. We had the flying car 18 years ago. That's another story altogether. So I won't go into that. Some of our graduate businesses, Planet Innovation. I don't know if anyone's heard of Planet Innovation, but they've, I don't know, is anyone here from Planet Innovation? No? So Planet Innovation started with us in 2012. They developed a solar panel technology which was designed to, it was running on a 40-watt light globe and basically kept your house at around an even temperature of around 18 degrees. And then your other heating and cooling systems brought it up. They won the ABC New Inventors Annual Award in that year, and through that process, developing the product, they actually mastered commercialisation. So this group of 4 engineers said, hey, we can apply this to many different ideas. And then so they founded Planet Innovation, which now employs around 200 people in their head office out in Box Hill. A really amazing story. They've won BRW Magazine and the Fin Review's Most Innovative Company in Australia 4 out of the last 5 years. So pretty amazing success story. I'll mention just one other on that page, the Sebitron here at the bottom, which is a preamp for studio recording. And that was developed in a little workshop space at Alphington, and Seb, who had that business, sold it into LA, into some recording studios, and it's actually been part of the recording of hundreds of millions of album sales for artists like Madonna, Michael Jackson, some really amazing, phenomenal things developed in a little workshop in Alphington in Melbourne's north. So some really amazing stories. And I thought it was really important to touch on this in I guess in the theme of the whole conference, that corporate innovation is exploding. So there's organisations that are positioning themselves to take advantage of this, and it's basically the concept and process of partnering startups with corporates. And so Slingshot, I don't know if anyone's heard of Slingshot. They're marketing themselves incredibly well at the moment, but they're partnering with organisations like Qantas and Queensland Government and Brisbane Airport to run industry-based accelerator programs. So they're calling for startups to come in and they work in with the innovation teams at these different organisations. And it's a really smart strategy for organisations that don't have good innovation practices and processes, in that they can take some of these best practice ideas from amazing people with really amazing technical knowledge. Corporate innovation funds, there's a number of those being established. A number of the universities are establishing their own funds. You've got either banks like ANZ and CBA are building big war chests to invest in new startups and innovative ideas. So we're seeing this investment process mature and capital become more freely available, which is a really exciting indicator for the future. And then organisational strategy from that perspective, I don't know if anyone saw in the news a couple of weeks ago, but ANZ announced that they're going to have 150 lean startup teams working within the organisation, and they're changing the whole way that their organisation works, and bringing together people from different facets of the business to form these lean teams. So we're seeing a shift within corporates, and it's adopting the methodology and ideas from our startups in the country. So really interesting things happening and changing at a rapid rate. And then investment innovation, as I mentioned, the equity crowdfunding is coming online. This is really exciting. So this legislation was passed in the UK around 5 or 6 years ago. There's been some really amazing stories out of that. New Zealand passed legislation 2 years ago, and similarly that's gained momentum. So what we've learnt from the figures around that is that the average investor invests around $7,000 to $8,000. They invest 7 times, so they'll invest that across 7 different startup companies. They're a university educated professional, and typically they're male. So hopefully we see a bit of a shift in that statistic. But we'll see this concept of individuals, retail investors, not sophisticated investors, being able to invest any amount of money in a startup they're interested in, they'll hold a stake in that. So imagine the possibilities around that in Australia. And then I guess I just wanted to touch on a few summary points in terms of innovation opportunities. And I think around the theme of the conference, the part that I'm really keen to get out of this and see from this is that there are some key takeaways, and I know we're going to cover off on this later this afternoon, but that we actually have some actions moving forward. So how are we going to collaborate? How are existing incubators going to be able to assist universities and vice versa? How can we work together to grow the pie rather than compete in the different spaces? Obviously, continual changes in pathway design, entrepreneurial journey. I see that we don't necessarily need to own any particular facet of the entrepreneurial journey. That's where we're keen to collaborate with universities, for example, in creating that pathway and logical next step out of a university accelerator or incubator program. And that they can come and I guess grow their business over a 3 to 5 year period within our organisation. Obviously, again, the challenges around corporate innovation and industry engagement, I think we've all got a role to play with that, and I think that we need to go back with compelling offers to industry and make them and force them to want to interact and work with us. And then the investment attraction piece, I think is really important. So having a collective or a consensus on what we require within the North as a region in terms of access to these spaces and facilities and the soft infrastructure which accompanies it, so the programs and how we deliver those. And that is the end of my presentation. I don't think it goes along to another slide, but thank you very much for the opportunity.